I really liked your book.
Oh, thank you.
It's interesting. I find it's like very timely too, right? Because it obviously hit a chord since I feel like I see you everywhere. I see the book title everywhere. You obviously,
that's good.
No, it's great.
It's
great. I think everybody can relate to some level of this,
That's right. Yeah.
So that's what I really love about it. I'll just do a quick little brief intro that we have Dr. Anna Lembke, who wrote the book Dopamine Nation. Here it is. And like I was saying, it's just like, obviously I hit a chord because we all have, we'll get into it. Why don't we start with the beginning, right? So can you just kind of tell everybody what is dopamine and why does it get released and why is it so important for us?
Yeah, so dopamine is a chemical made in our brain. It has a number of different functions, but one of its most important functions is to mediate our experience of pleasure, motivation, and reward. It's a neurotransmitter, so it's a chemical that's released between neurons. Neurons are these long spindly cells that conduct these electrical impulses, but they don't actually touch. There's a little gap between them, and that gap is called the synapse. And neurotransmitters are the molecules that bridge that gap, and dopamine is one of many neurotransmitters. Dopamine is released when we do something pleasurable or rewarding, but it's also really important for motivation. It may be even more important for motivation than pleasure. And dopamine is also important to movement. So I'm sure you've heard of Parkinson's disease, and that's actually a depletion or lowering of dopamine in a different part of the brain called the substantia nigra. But it's no coincidence that pleasure, motivation, and reward and movement are mediated by the same neurotransmitter. Because of course, for most of human existence, or for that matter, organismal existence, we've had to, move to get our reward. That's no longer true, which is one of the things that makes living in the world today so challenging. But movement and motivation and reward are closely linked in the body.
You talk a lot in your book about having that balance between the pain and pleasure. It's like a seesaw in a way, right? You can't have too much. Even too much pleasure can actually lead to a lot of pain or depression. Right. I found that to be extremely interesting to me personally. I'm sure other people obviously did too. Now, I guess my first real question with that then is, number one, how do you balance it? And I guess it's a two-pronged question. When you talk about even addiction, let's just go with that actually. Mm-hmm. Is there certain people who are more vulnerable to addiction? And do you find that in our time now, that with social media and all this other, quick dopamine, instant gratification hits, that it's spiked and increased over the last 10 years?
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with the second part of your question. It is indeed true that people are differentially vulnerable to the problem of addiction, especially to traditional drugs like drugs and alcohol, right? Not everybody is equally susceptible to that problem. And we know that risk or vulnerability of getting addicted to drugs and alcohol is partially genetic or inborn. If you have a biological parent or grandparent with addiction to alcohol, for example, you are at increased risk compared to the general population of becoming an alcoholic, even if you are raised in a totally different home and don't have that behavior modeled for you. So that's a really important, thing to realize.
There is actually so people do say that, and it's people always poo-poo it, but that is a thing that people actually are born with that gene.
Oh yeah, for sure. But here's the sort of wrinkle and the reason that, one of the main reasons I wrote Dopamine Nation. There's this concept of so first of all, there's this pleasure-pain balance that I talk about in the brain and how pleasure and pain are co-located. They work like opposite sides of a balance. When we experience pleasure, that balance tips one way. When we experience pain, it tips the other. An overriding rule governing the balance is that it wants to stay level. And the way it stays level is first by tilting an equal and opposite amount to whatever the initial stimulus was. So let me just describe that. I like romance novels. They release dopamine in my brain's reward pathway. I get a little tip to the side of pleasure, but then, I have these neuroadaptation gremlins that hop on the pain side of the balance to bring it level again, but they don't get off right when the balance is level. They like it there. So they stay on until I'm tipped an equal amount to pain, and then they get off. And when my balance is tipped to pain, that's the moment of like not being able to put the book down and feeling that urge to read another chapter, right? It's that moment of wanting, because I'm in this mini dopamine deficit state, which is what happens when we get a surge of dopamine. Our brain will compensate by downregulating our own dopamine transmission, not just to baseline, but below baseline. That's those neuroadaptation gremlins. Now, if I wait long enough, they hop off, and balance is restored. But the key thing to keep in mind here is that every pleasure has a price. Every pleasure has a price, okay? And if we deviate our balance to the side of pleasure, we are going to have to pay for it with the aftermath. But now getting back to genetics, what tips my balance may not tip your balance, right? So my balance is actually not tipped at all by alcohol and other drugs. Even caffeine doesn't do anything for me. So I thought that I didn't have the addiction gene. I thought I wasn't vulnerable to that problem. But then lo and behold, the internet was invented and the Kindle was invented, and I discovered, teenage vampire romance novels, and I became a chain reader. And as I talk about in the book, I really actually got addicted to reading on my Kindle a certain, genre of book that progressed over time to frank erotica, essentially socially sanctioned pornography for women. And that would never have happened, if technology had not invented this infinite access to these types of books that have been engineered. Books are also engineered to keep us engaged, right? And so that's a key piece of the message, that not everybody's equally vulnerable to the problem of addiction. Some people are more vulnerable than others. But what we have now is an infinite quantity of highly reinforcing drugs and behaviors, the drugification of things that weren't even drugs before, like human attachment and food. Those are now drugs, or potential drugs, right? And so we've greatly expanded the vulnerability in the population to the problem of addiction. And that's borne out by epidemiology. So for example, if you just look even at alcohol, rates of alcoholism or alcohol use disorder, as we say in the field of addiction medicine, in women have gone up 80% in the last 30 years. 80%. So it used to be that men outnumbered women 5-1 to 2-1 in terms of rates of alcohol addiction. Now it's 1-1, starting with the millennials.
Wow.
Yep. Rates of alcohol.
Why do you think that is, though? Is it
God, yeah, a lot. Yeah.
I want to know why. Sorry. Yeah, no, I want to know. Is that because women are on social media I would think it's because you're so much more susceptible because of this whole comparison game. So people try to distract themselves. They try to kind of lose themselves, and they're going towards things that are like that. That's my guess. You tell me why.
I mean, I think it's
parents, being a mother, being a parent, being more difficult.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's a lot of different factors. First of all, the population in general is getting more addicted because it's easier to get alcohol and other drugs. We now have drugs that didn't exist before, like social media is the drugification of, we're now getting addicted to social media, right? So I think
we are addicted.
We are, right.
You're lucky that you're not on it. That was a very smart move by you, because once you're on it, it's very, very hard to get off of it, right? It's like, like what you were saying, you just said a lot of great things there that I wanted to pick apart. Number one, that drugs, it's not just drugs and alcohol that you can become addicted to. You can become addicted to a plethora of things. One being, which I thought was very shocking, which you were very candid about, like you were saying, reading romance novels. I would never think reading would be an addiction. Does that mean anything can be an addiction if you do too much of it? Like, what quantifies something as an addiction?
The key message here is that technology has allowed us to drugify things that were not previously addicted, but are now. And the features are quantity. So the more access you have to a drug, the more likely you are to get addicted, because quantity and frequency matter, and TikTok never runs out. Right?
That's true.
We have potency. So like how much dopamine gets released in the reward pathway. And really, this technology has unlocked the code of how to release dopamine. They know exactly how to do it. You rank things, you enumerate it with number of likes. You include these bright colors, beautiful images, sounds, confetti. You link it to a social tribe. But part of what releases dopamine is when we have the same emotion as other people at the same time that they're having it, right? That's a huge release of dopamine. And then you make that tribe not 1 or 2 or 10 or 20, but you make it 20 million, that's a huge and potent source of dopamine, and also a huge and potent source of a potential severe come down if you don't get the response that you were hoping for or that you wanted. Plus, you've got novelty. You've got drugs that didn't exist before. Again, social media, video games didn't exist before. A lot of drugs that now are much more accessible because they're online. Pornography, right? Pornography, it was like you had to work to go get the Playboy, or you hear middle-aged men talk about how, when they were teenagers, now you got 5-year-olds, swiping right and swiping left. It's really, really scary.
So wait, so then are we saying, because there's two things. Are you saying that women, it's up 80% for alcohol? Is it because more access what is it, the access part that is
I think
the reason?
The biggest factor is the access. I think another big piece of it is cultural changes. So, previously it was much more stigmatized for women to use substances. Okay. And now it's really not. Now it's even kind of like a bit of a badge of feminism, right? That we're going to use we're going to drink our alcohol the way we want to drink our alcohol. Right.
We're going to be a boss. We're going to be like a man. Yeah. We're equal to a man, if not more. And therefore we can do that. But then getting back to this romance novel so then that means your situation. At what point did you feel that was even an addiction? Like how much is too much when you read? I mean, when you read, is it that at what point are you like, this is getting to be a problem? And then do you even have to go cold turkey, or how do you do it? It's are you not allowed to read anybody with Fabio on the cover? I don't.
Yeah, right. Great question. So, broadly defined addiction, we base a diagnosis of addiction on the 4 C's: out of control use, compulsive use, cravings, and continued use despite consequences. And what happened to me, and also there's also tolerance. Tolerance is finding that our drug isn't working at the dose that it used to work, and we need more and more to get the same effect, and also withdrawal when we stop. And I actually had all of those things. Wow. So I started to have out of control use where, I would plan to just read a chapter or maybe just finish the book. And it would be midnight, so it was cutting into my sleep, and I had to work the next day. My husband's asleep next to me. And instead of putting that Kindle down, I would find myself compulsively scrolling for another book as soon as I finished one book. I also experienced problems with tolerance, where I found that after I had, consumed all of the teenage vampire romance novels, werewolf novels, witch romance novels, necromancers, soothsayers, all of the different kinds of fantasy genres, then I needed, basically frank erotica in order to, get my fix. And I got to a point where I wouldn't even finish the books. I would just to get to the, 3/4 of the way through, which is the climactic scene in every single. If you take a romance novel and you literally visually open it to 3/4 of the through, you will find the climactic sex scene in there. And I would get to that point, and then I wouldn't read anymore. It was I was just going for my black tar heroin. I wouldn't.
Really?
And then, yeah. And also I was spending, less time with my kids, with my husband. I started taking romance novels to work and reading between patients. I just got totally absorbed in this fantasy world where I always wanted to be in that world. A little bit the way people describe a little bit social media, they're just sort of, it's always calling them and pulling to them. So, and I did what I recommend, when I finally realized it, which I realized by telling another human being what was going on. I did what I recommend to my patients with drug and alcohol addiction. I abstained for a month. And a month is sort of what happens in the brain if you repeatedly expose your brain to highly reinforcing drugs and behaviors is that in order to compensate, you accumulate more and more neuroadaptation gremlins on the pain side of the balance. And ultimately, you end up in a dopamine deficit state where you've reset your hedonic or joy set point to the side of pain. Now you're in a chronic dopamine deficit state. modest rewards aren't rewarding, and you need to keep using your drug, not to get high, but just to level the balance and feel normal. So what happens when you first abstain, obviously, you go into withdrawal. And that is actually what happened to me. I had a lot of increased anxiety and irritability and insomnia. I really had lost the art of falling asleep without this behavior. So it was really tough for me the first 2 weeks, but by the time I got to weeks 3 and 4, I felt a lot better. And I was out of this craving place, I could enjoy other things again. I could look back and say, wow, that was like a nutty interlude in my life. And then I thought, well, I'm good. I'm going to go back to, reading now and then. And I picked up a romance novel, and then I binged the entire weekend.
Wow.
So, yeah, which is what happens to my patients. And
right.
So
I find this this is what I find so fascinating, because it's like you always hear about drugs and alcohol and even social media, right? You don't ever think about these more ancillary things that truthfully, like anybody can have an addiction that is not so obvious or socially or they could be socially acceptable. Reading is very socially acceptable. Right. So you don't think, well, if it interferes with my life, it's okay because it's just reading. You know, like that's what I find interesting. And to your point, then you even started binge reading. So how are you doing it now? Are you not allowed to do it? Yeah.
So for me, what I decided after that was that I needed to abstain for a year, that clearly a month was enough to kind of make me be able to recapture joy in other things, but was not enough to give me the ability to go back and use in moderation. So I abstained for an entire year. I was really pretty good about it. I would say I made it the whole year. And then something really interesting, I tried to go back using in moderation. What I found is the drug didn't work at all. Like I had just totally saturated those neurons. Mm-hmm. Like it was like this was not going to work, right? If I was going to have to look for something more than that. And that was a really interesting experience, because I was like, wow, okay. And if I really did have sort of this, I would say the disease of addiction in its severest form, I would have found something else. Like I would have gone it. But because I don't have that, I'm screwed up in a lot of other ways, but I don't have that particular thing. I was able to just reflect and go, okay, there's no end to it. Like there's no end to it. So I'm just not going to go there. And I was able also to implement, what I think is one of the most important messages of the book, which is that a better way to get your dopamine is actually to do things that are hard up front. Because when we press on the pain side of the balance, those gremlins hop on the pleasure side and reset our pleasure-pain pathway to the side of pleasure. So I use a lot of sort of effortful engagement, like exercise. It's probably my main one. And creative things that I try to do, service work as a way to get my dopamine indirectly. And I do a lot of also just kind of like tempering my expectations and recognizing that life is hard, and it's not just going to be necessarily pleasurable when I want it to be pleasurable. My happiest moments are going to come probably when I'm not expecting it and when I can't control it. Control is such a big part of addiction, right? That we can change the way we feel when we want to, how much we want to, in that very moment. And so kind of this really giving up control and saying, who knows when the next time I'm going to feel, joy. I hope it comes soon. But in the meantime, I just have to sit here and be patient.
I'm glad that you mentioned control, right? I think a lot of this has to do with control. And but I wanted to say something else, like because you did the romance novels, and then you said this whole thing about doing the hard things first, which I talk about that quite often. But if you do exercise, you could be an exercise. You can transfer that. Like there's a lot of people who are like exercise addicts, right? Like you can become like, for me, I don't think I'm necessarily well, maybe I am actually. Like if I don't work out every day, I get crazy. Like I become extremely hyper. I can become anxious. I'm irritable, and I'm not right. I'm not right. And right. Mm-hmm. And so I've been taught, or like, oh, that's a positive trait, good for you. That's a great thing, good on you. But the truth is, like, is it good on me? I mean, I would work out through injury. And that's just not me. It's a lot of people, especially type A personalities.
Right. Okay. So a couple things there. I mean, we are evolved over millions of years of evolution to walk tens of kilometers a day. And our lives today are incredibly sedentary. So in fact, we were meant to be very, very active, much more active than we are now. So it's pretty hard to get to a point where you're actually entering the addicted to exercise realm. It definitely happens. And I've had patients who have gotten addicted to it. How do you know you're addicted? Again, compulsion, craving, and most importantly, continued use despite consequences. So you're injured, but you're still pounding it just like before. You're not allowing your body to rest when it really needs to rest. But another key piece to understanding this is that, and so what I'm talking about is mild to moderate exposure to noxious stimuli or pain is healthy, but extreme exposure is not healthy. Like cutting on yourself, that'll definitely release opioids, but that's not healthy, right? We're talking about, tempered exposure. But I will also add that the world has also drugified exercise. Right. So, and how has it done that? Well, social media is one of the most important ways. Now, on Strava, you can see if how your times rank, leaderboards, even high school athletes now, like they have YouTube channels. They're all following each. I know this because I've got kids who are high school athletes. It's not just like, oh yeah, I won the race at my, local dual meet. It's like, how do my times compare to, Katie living in Louisiana? It's like, who, that's so kind of a craziness, right? But that's what's happened, this constant comparison. And then also I talk about in my book how literally like the technology of exercise has made exercise more addictive. In my book, I talk about how we used to think in neuroscience, in the field of neuroscience, that running wheels were a way to measure healthy exercise in rats in a cage. But it turns out that for rats, running wheels can be addictive. If you put a running wheel in nature, you will have rodents who will run on that running wheel, even though they're in nature, right? It's got intrinsic appeal to its own. You can have rats that run so much on the running wheel, they permanently torque their tails to the shape of the running wheel. The smaller the running wheel, the more their tails are bent. You have rats that will run to death, right?
That's amazing.
Yeah, right. So, and like, what is it about the running wheel? It's something about the way that running wheel, which doesn't exist in nature, defies gravity in a way that's just highly reinforcing for, the mammalian brain. Somehow, going vertically or horizontally defying gravity is just like, it's a major adrenaline rush.
I mean, I guess you can say like the running wheel would be like a treadmill in a way.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Exactly. Right. And so the treadmill, in mild to moderate doses is better than not exercising at all, but can you overdo it? Absolutely. And is there an intrinsic quality to all of this like technology and equipment and like the way we compare, that all fuels the potential addictive.
Oh, I could not agree with you more. I mean, even with Apple Watches and, like even now you're monitoring your sleep. I mean, all this health optimization, I joke around always with my friends, like that's actually all these things to kind of like all this extra knowledge that we never had before is actually stressing us all out. Like all these sleep apps, I couldn't wear it anymore because I was like looking at them all the time. I'm like, I couldn't sleep because of my sleep apps. You know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah.
It's so counterintuitive to the purpose. I mean, and you're right. So that even before social media, like look at the internet, like you kind of touched upon, how I'm very curious of how all of our mental health and our dopamine and all our issues spiked even before Instagram, but just on the fact that we had more availability on screens and information and watching porn or whatever that is, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I remember about 2010, all of a sudden, all these middle-aged men started coming in for porn addiction. And it makes sense, because the smartphone came out in about 2001. And these were all folks that, had a like used porn,
right.
through their adult lives, but it was basically manageable till the smartphone. And then all of a sudden, 5-10 years after the smartphone, these men came in with absolutely ruined lives. They could not stop themselves.
And what do people, so I guess two things. Number one, is there a personality type, even though with all of these accoutrements now, that is more vulnerable? Like, is there characteristics of people, like traits that make people more vulnerable to addiction? And then do you have like a recipe for people to like self monitor themselves or like self maintain themselves?
Yeah.
To be more cognizant so they don't get into that trap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there are lots of sort of validated characteristics that make somebody more vulnerable to addiction. We used to call it the addictive personality. We don't really call it that anymore. We just call it, the disease of addiction. But the disease of addiction takes the vulnerability plus the drug, right? Mm-hmm. So, and it's like finding your drug plus your vulnerability. But really, we're all vulnerable in a way today because we all have the same motivational neural networks that make us inherently approach pleasure and avoid pain. That's how we're wired. But the traits, so co-occurring mental illness of any kind makes somebody more vulnerable to addiction. Impulsivity, so the inability to sort of push the pause button between wanting to do something and doing it makes people more vulnerable. Cognitive frontal lobe kind of attentional problems make people more vulnerable to addiction. Emotion dysregulation, people who get really dysregulated and then stay in that place and can't bring themselves down. Those folks are more vulnerable to the problem of addiction. So yeah, definitely there's this innate vulnerability. In terms of what to do about it, my book lays out pretty clearly what that would look like. The first thing to do is, number one, identify what is your drug of choice and to really be honest with yourself and preferably another human being, or just with yourself in a journal if you're not comfortable sharing with another human being. But writing it down or verbalizing exactly what you're doing, how much, how often, because that really makes it real in a way that it's not when it's just sort of like, in the back of our minds. And that was true with my romance novel addiction, that it wasn't until I really said to someone else, I think I've got a little reading problem. It was like, oh, I think I do have a problem with that.
Right,
so,
right.
It's funny how that happens. And then
it feels more real when you say it out loud or you write it down or right.
Yeah, you kind of come out of your waking dream. You can't sleepwalk your way through that anymore.
Right.
And then the thing that I recommend is a month of abstinence from our drug of choice. So, deleting that app, or in my case, getting rid of my Kindle and not reading romance, or for people with sex addiction, no pornography and no orgasms with themselves or others, or no alcohol or no cannabis or whatever it is. Obviously, people who might go into life-threatening withdrawal wouldn't do this.
Right.
People who repeatedly try to stop and weren't able to stop on their own. But for those with more mild to moderate forms of this problem who are able to stop on their own, that's what I recommend, with the caveat that you will feel worse before you will feel better. Why will you feel worse? Because you're going to take the weight off the pleasure side. Those neuroadaptation gremlins are going to slam your balance down to the pain side, and you will experience the universal symptoms of withdrawal from any addictive substance, which are anxiety, irritability, insomnia, depression, and craving. But if you wait long enough, the gremlins hop off and homeostasis is restored, and people generally feel much better and are less craving and may be able to engage their frontal lobes to make more realistic determinations of what kind of relationship they want to have with their drug of choice. And then from there, you decide, do you want to continue to abstain? Can you continue to abstain? If not, then how are you going to use? And the specificity is key here. How much are you going to use on any given day? Exactly what are you going to use? Under what circumstances are you going to use? What are the red flags you're going to look for when your use is getting out of control? How are you going to track it? I talk a lot about self-binding strategies, which is a way of pressing the pause button between the desire to use and actually having access to your drug. So are you going to get the drug out of the house? Are you going to make sure you only have access on certain occasions? So access is really, really important. When access is there, it's actually a strain on our minds because we're always going, I could check it now. I could check it now. I could check it now. It's like resisting, scratching an itch. Whereas if we don't have access, well, that kind of goes away. So that's really key. I recommend doing this with a friend or a loved one or as a family. If you can't do a month, do less than that. For some people, just not using their phone for 24 hours is a hardship, which is really almost alarming for me to see that as as things have progressed over the last 20 years, really highly sort of successful people couldn't imagine not having access to their phone for even 24 hours.
I know. It's crazy.
Striking to me. Yeah.
It's amazing. I remember even like 15 years ago, right? I had my cell phone and I barely used it. Like I only used it for an emergency, right?
Yeah, right.
And it's funny how that's evolved to such a point where now you can't even imagine not picking it up every minute. But you said something too that I think is very important. There's things and I think people like work, for example, or food for access reasons, right? Like people who are food addicts, who you have to eat 3 times a day, or if you're intermittent fasting, at least once a day.
Right.
How do you moderate that? And work, because I think work, people really, that's not only is it socially acceptable, it's like revered in a lot of places like New York, San Francisco, even LA, where, like they're such a hard worker. But that also is that would take your 4 C's and you would, take it through the roof.
Yeah. So you're right. Workaholism is a huge modern problem, especially in certain professions. Again, I really recommend starting with the dopamine fast, because the salience that we attribute to these behaviors when we're caught up in them really goes away when we stop them for long enough for our brains to reset reward pathways. And you may be able to relate to this experience where you have the opportunity to go on a vacation, you leave your devices and your work at home, and all of those fears of missing out, that you're indispensable, that things are going to go haywire if you don't immediately respond to them. You have those in the first part of your vacation, right? But by the time you get to maybe to day 4 or 5 or whatever it is, you realize, that was crazy. Like, I don't need to be that available.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And I'm not indispensable. And these things will either sort themselves out or they don't matter. Right. And you come to this place where you have this realization. And then, of course, you come back and you're like, you don't even want to restart. You didn't want to check your email because you're going to. So, but that's the key to kind of reset things. And then when you go back, put in those self-binding strategies, say, you know what? I'm not going to bring that device home, or I'm going to turn it off at 5 p.m. I mean, turn it all the way off, power that sucker down and put it in my bag. And I'm not going to go get it. And I'm going to do that together with a partner, right? Where we're going to make this tech-free space. I mean, these are all really hard. Don't get me wrong. I go home every night and I'm like, I'm not going to watch YouTube while I'm brushing my teeth. I'm really not going to watch. And every night I'm like, YouTube.
Exactly. I feel like you're a psychiatrist. Is there something, it's so true. And this is what I think is I think the more you focus on something, I feel the worse it gets. Like, for example, if I say, I'm not going to have that piece of chocolate cake, I'm not going to have that piece of chocolate cake, I'll not only eat that piece of chocolate cake, I'll eat the entire cake, right? Like it's because I'm so preoccupied with it, right?
Right.
So like, how do people handle that? Like, it's all in theory. It sounds like great. Like, I'm going to abstain for a month. And like, you talk a lot about this, the first 2 weeks are hell, 3rd week, 4th week, it gets much better. But even in the middle or whenever you're doing it and you really, you have a problem, you're self-aware enough, but you really have, like, you're so addicted that you don't have you're so impulsive, or you cannot get that thought. You cannot stop that thought unless you actually do it. Yeah. Like with your romance novel or my chocolate cake or whatever it is.
Right. Yeah. So what that is, I mean, you're getting to the essence of what we mean when we talk about craving. Craving are these intrusive thoughts or images, right, that come into our minds, and we feel in that moment overwhelming dysphoria and anxiety, the only solution to which is to consume that thing, right? And that's craving. But the truth is that if we just sit with that feeling and do not act on it, it will pass. We have this subjective experience that it will go on forever unless we give into it, but really it will pass. So what is the key to affording ourselves time to let it pass? Self-binding. We cannot have the chocolate cake in the house. If you put the chocolate cake in front of me, I will eat the chocolate cake when I'm craving the chocolate. There's just no way. That's like 2 + 2 = 4.
Right. But you go to a party.
Yeah, going to a party, right. For a while, maybe you can't go to those parties, right? You can't go. because at that party, but if you have enough abstinence, I promise you, with sustained abstinence, it gets easier. You re-engage your frontal lobe. You're not immune, but you re-engage your frontal lobe, your physiology changes, and you're not in that vortex. The other thing that's just really, really helpful for a lot of different reasons is to connect with people on a regular basis struggling with the same problem. And of course, this is the genius of Alcoholics Anonymous. But it really, really works. And there's Food Addicts Anonymous, there's Overeaters Anonymous, there's
Readers Anonymous?
Oh, there's probably a Readers Anonymous. I don't know, but there probably is. There's a Sex and Love Addiction Anonymous. There's a Love Addiction Anonymous. That's kind of, similar bucket.
Well, you know what? I also find that a lot of times that people are doing great, right? They kind of are like on that path. Why do people like self-sabotage themselves when they're doing so well?
Well, because of the gremlins,
they kind of creep up again.
Yeah, well, what happens is this is about triggers, and triggers can be external things, people, places, and things that remind us of our drug, or even our own euphoric recall of the drug, where we remember only the good things and none of the bad things, which is what we all tend to do.
Romanticize it, basically.
Right. And what neuroscience has shown, and this is to me really fascinating, that when we are triggered for our drug, or even just remember our drug, we actually get a release of dopamine. So that alone gets us a little bit high, but then that's followed immediately by the dopamine deficit state. So then we go into craving. So already this cycle of elevated dopamine and then below baseline levels of dopamine occurs with the reminder of the drug. And of course, once we're in that dopamine deficit state, then that's craving, and then we're driven to do the work to go get the drug. So protecting ourselves from the triggers is really important, and also doing what's called thinking through the drink. When we have euphoric recall, trying to remind ourselves, wait a minute, my brain is telling me all the great things, but I have to force myself to remember all of the bad things that came afterward, because we will remember how good it felt, but we don't remember all the crap. And then we go for the drug and we try it and it doesn't even feel that good, right? Because our brain has now already been recalibrated for that substance and it doesn't work. And then we're frustrated because then we relapsed anyway. But then it's like, well, now I might as well eat the whole cake because if a piece doesn't work, and it's just, so it's such a vicious cycle. But we can get a hold of it. I also really think that this pressing on the pain side is key. And I also talk about radical honesty, telling the truth and making intimate human connections.
I want to talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you talk about in dopamine, it's like each letter stands for something else, and people can read the book, but to get all of it. But you do talk about the M is for mindfulness, and you get that, you hear about that a lot. Right. But the way you say it is actually, I really enjoy the way you talk about it. It's not so like common as everyone else mentions, but like you said, like it's kind of, it reminds me when you have that chocolate cake craving. I'm just using that as an example, but like when you have any type of thing, if you actually like sit with it long enough, it will dissipate. But in the moment, you don't think it will, right? So if you can remind yourself in that moment, this too shall pass, right?
Right.
But you do talk about the truth telling, and I do want. We just mentioned it, so let's talk about that, and then I wanted to ask you something differently.
Yeah. So the other thing that I prescribe to patients in this 30-day period, but also for recovery in general, which is just something I learned from patients in recovery, which is that we need to tell the truth about things large and small. And once we start lying, even about little things, we're vulnerable to relapse, and that's sort of interesting. Like,
why is that?
Yeah, why is that? Right?
Yeah.
And I write in the book about how it works on a number of different levels. But, one of the important ways that it works is that when we're radically honest with other people that we love and care about, we think that they're going to go running, screaming from us because we're exposing, warts and all. But instead, what it actually does is make people feel closer to us. So it promotes intimacy, and true intimacy is a great and healthy source of dopamine. And when we feel that hit of intimacy, boy, that's one of the rare moments in life, at least for me, where I feel truly happy, for a while, right? Before I'm, not again. So So that's really important. The other thing is that, the stories that the autobiographical narratives or stories that we tell about our lives are really, really important. And there are healing narratives, and then there are destructive narratives. And I've learned over the years that healing narratives are the ones that adhere closest to true reality. That is to say, the ones that if you were to say, get every single person who saw the car crash at the intersection and put all their versions of it together, you would get closest to what it is. But instead, what we often want to do is write a story where we're the heroes or we're the victims, or where we're not really being totally honest about how we contributed to the problem. It's really important that we do that our stories that we tell about our lives really honestly look at the ways that we've messed up. And that's uncomfortable to do that. It's not sort of our natural reflex. We're generally wanting to cover that stuff up. But I found that's really important. Why? Because these narratives are not just a way to organize the past. They're really also a roadmap for the future. So if we're telling stories that aren't true, we're not going to have access to the information that we need going forward to make good decisions. But true stories allow us to really pinpoint what's really happening, and then enlist the evidence to make better decisions going forward.
So that's why I feel like friends of mine who've been in like AA and all this, that's like a big thing, right? It's all about radical honesty. And it's like, if you say a little lie, that can lead, it's a gateway to a big lie, right?
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
Right. So even like, if you smoke a little bit of pot, that could be a gateway to heroin. Or by the way, like pot can be like, people are over ODing on pot because they think it's as you talk about this in your book with one of your heroes' patients, right? Like that people think, oh, I have anxiety. I'm going to mask it with this will help. But that ends up becoming the problem.
Right.
When do people, can you give a couple of examples or tell people when that, like how they know when that is an issue? Like, let's just use the pot example, right? Like you have anxiety, so you end up like smoking every day. And then you think if you don't smoke, you're going to keep on having terrible anxiety, when really it's that's the underpinning. The underpinning is actually the problem that you're trying to mask it with is the problem.
So this gets to the whole concept of self-medication and this idea that intoxicants like cannabis are self-medication for an underlying psychiatric disorder like depression. And it is very true that, with initial use, immediately we get relief from those psychiatric symptoms. But with continued use, we basically change our dopamine set point such that we're walking around with our balance tilted to the side of pain. And now essentially the pot is driving the depression and anxiety. And I know this from, the neuroscience, but also my clinical experience. I have so many patients come in, they want help with depression, anxiety. They're smoking pot every day. They want me to prescribe them an antidepressant. 20 years ago, I would have. Now I say, you know what? You got to cut out the pot for a month, and that alone may cure your depression. And of course, they don't ever think that could be true because they say, but wait a minute, I feel better when I smoke. It's the only thing that helps my depression. I say, well, it may feel in the moment that it's helping your depression, but really all it's doing is getting you to equilibrium, right? It's just restoring homeostasis temporarily while more gremlins hop on the pain side. And then those who are willing and able to do the experiment, about 80% of them will come back and say, I haven't felt this good in years. I hadn't realized that the pot itself was making me feel bad.
How many people, or what's the percentage, if you have it, of people who actually are able to do that? Like, just like basically not do anything for the month and like wait it out. Do people usually just give up because they can't take it? Or like, what's the ratio?
I would say,
seen?
Yeah. So in my clinical practice, I would say roughly between about 50%, let's say, are both willing and able to do it. About 50% of folks. Some people just aren't willing. They just won't buy into even doing the experiment. Right. Some people plan to do it and then aren't able to. And that's also useful information, right? It's like, well, maybe this is actually not within your willful control. Like we set that goal, you agreed to the goal, but you couldn't do it. Maybe you need a higher level of care. a more extreme intervention, like maybe a residential treatment facility. And then also importantly, although most people feel much better if they do it and they're successful, there's a percentage of folks who don't. Probably about 20% of folks come back and say, I abstained for the whole month. I don't feel any better. What you predicted didn't happen for me. And that's, again, it's always sad, but also really useful information, because it's like, okay, whatever's going on with you is not then primarily being driven by your drug use.
Can you what's the most obscure addiction that you've seen in your office? You've been doing this for 25 years, right? Yeah. You've been a psychiatrist. You still practice, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, most of my professional work is seeing patients and teaching other people.
Do you do virtual? Not because for me, I'm just asking, do you do virtual? I'm sure you're so inundated with people who just want to work with you now, right?
So I'm not personally taking new patients, just to put that out there.
You'll be flooded with more, right?
Yeah, I'm primarily, counseling other people now to see patients and, supporting them in that endeavor. And about 95% of our care now is virtual. Since the pandemic, it used to be all in person, and now it's 95% virtual. And we can only see people in California because that's where we have a medical license. So it's all. The most unusual addiction probably was a woman who had been addicted to alcohol and was in sustained recovery from her alcohol use, but then got addicted to water. And what happened there was that she had figured out that if she drank very large volumes of water, she could cause herself to become hyponatremic and altered because of that. So that was really sad. Yeah.
Where is she now?
She ended her life. Yeah. So she died of her disease. Very, very sad.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
How much water would you need to drink for that to happen?
Liters and liters.
Wow. So that's the most unusual one that you've seen, basically.
Yeah, then there's like a whole host of just new behavioral addictions. Behavioral addictions are addictions to a behavior rather than a drug, all manner of, as you know from my book, sex and pornography addiction, but also all kinds of addictions of digital drugs.
Then have you seen people who are insensitive to dopamine, like who are unable to get that? Like, what would that be called if you're not able to get that dopamine high?
That's almost, you could almost call that depression, right?
That would be depression, right?
Right. And sometimes that the theory is that's why people with severe depression are at higher risk for addiction, because they're reaching, for something to get them out of that. But the irony, the terrible paradox there is that addictive substances ultimately make the depression worse, right? So even if you start out here with a pleasure pain balance to the side of pain, if you use an intoxicant, those gremlins will just push you further down on the pain side.
So, is there to get it back to the baseline with the pleasure pain? Would you have to do what you the completely go cold turkey for the month, basically, to kind of level yourself back up to baseline?
Yeah. So a lot of times patients will say, "Well, can I just cut back?" And in my clinical experience, that doesn't work. Why? Because you never restore baseline homeostasis. You just kind of inch yourself a little bit here, but you never get the reward of being at baseline and feeling what it's like to be out of that vortex of compulsive overconsumption and be able to enjoy other things. It really takes 3 to 4 weeks minimum of abstinence.
But what about things like the working or the eating? Because you need to be doing those. So what are you supposed to do?
Well, for food addiction, what needs to happen
or work addictions, probably more, because people are working and they need to sustain, like an attorney or an investment banker or me, anybody who works a lot. Like, how are you and like you're an entrepreneur, right? Because it's like you eat what you kill, right?
Yeah, right.
How can you moderate that?
Well, very, very hard. I'm not pretending like that's easy. I do think, again, quantity and frequency really matter with any addiction. So making sure that you take a day of Sabbath, and rest 1 day a week, making sure that you get enough sleep and exercise and structure, trying to even limit the number of hours that you work on any given day. People are very embracing of intermittent fasting. How about intermittent working?
Yeah.
That might be the thing. And then I think also qualitatively, just being aware of what aspects of your work bring you a kind of deeper joy and what aspects leave you feeling sort of frustrated and angry and irritable. And then if you have the ability to sort of parse away those things that are ultimately don't give you a sense of meaning and purpose, and trying to keep the things that do.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, your book is very, very good. It's called Dopamine Nation. I will let you off because it's all in here. You've been doing so many podcasts, and I mean, you must be getting tired of answering the same questions probably over and over and over again. But
well, I believe in the message, so I want to get it out there to as many people. I do feel it's fundamental to, a flourishing life in the modern world. It's worked for so many of my patients in their recovery. I've stolen so many of their ideas in my own life. It can sometimes be hard to do the interviews over and over again, but that's one of the things I've been looking at myself as we're talking about, work and how to optimize it. And one of the things I've concluded is if I feel like I make a real honest human connection with the interviewer, then actually it's very joyful for me and not burdensome. And I feel that way today with you. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's so sweet to say. I feel the same way.
Yeah, you're very real. And I feel like we made an honest connection. But some other times I haven't been able to have that feeling. And then it's not as joyful. And I'm not saying it's the interviewer's fault. It could just as well be my fault. Sometimes you just kind of can't make the connection.
Yeah.
And you just feel that.
And also I think that it could be mind-numbingly annoying when people are asking you, what is dopamine, over and over and over again. And you have to sit there and be polite. And it's a difficult thing. I mean,
I don't mind that, because I'm pretty stupid myself and I need to hear things over and over.
I don't think you're stupid at all. I
like to teach to a receptive audience. I love to teach. That's a great joy.
Do you teach still, by the way?
Oh yeah, I basically am a clinician educator. So I see patients and I teach. I teach all the time. That's what I do.
You do teach all the time.
Oh yeah.
Well, because your book is so successful. I mean, do you ever get are you addicted to looking at how many copies are being sold?
I was when it first came out. I was because I didn't think it would sell but 2 copies. And then when it was number 2 on Amazon or number 1 on Audible, I got addicted to checking it. I was checking every hour. I did that for about 2 weeks. See, here's the thing about life. We keep making the same mistakes over and over again, but hopefully we make them faster. So this time it didn't take me 2 years. It just took me 2 weeks to go, I'm getting addicted to, and so then I stopped. And now I don't. And also I never watch myself being interviewed later. Never.
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, how did you even the self-awareness of okay, I'm getting addicted to looking at that happening? Because I was thinking, how do you not, if you're a human being? I mean, it was also, it's a New York Times bestseller too, isn't it? What number did it get to in New York Times?
I don't know. I stopped looking.
That's when, but how do you stop? So you kind of caught yourself, and then how did you stop it though? With all your training, you're just you kind of just implemented this 1 month abstaining from looking, and then you got better.
Yeah, I know it sounds too simple to be true, but I'm telling you, if you can get through a month of not using, you get out of the suction of the black hole. And then you get to this place where you can enlist your own agency and decide. And deciding in a way that's consistent with your values, goals, meaning, and purpose is then really, really important. So, why did I write the book? I didn't write the book to sell a lot of books or make money. And trust me, I'm not making a lot of money on the book. I know
how that works, and I know.
Yeah, right. Yes. I wrote the book because I wanted to get a message out, that I thought would be helpful to people. And that's then, okay, what am I doing the things to help get the message out? And then those are the things I focus on.
No, I think it's great. Are you doing a lot of speaking engagements, at different colleges and?
Yeah, so I get invited to do those. I do those. I like the podcasts better because it's one-on-one with a human, and when we have a good connection, it's really enjoyable.
Right.
I'm not as much of get on the stage, and I can do that, but I don't enjoy that. Also, a lot of these virtual events now, you can't see anybody.
I know.
So you're like a floating head in Zoom land. And that's very creepy and disorienting. I don't like that at all.
No, I totally hear that. Are you planning on writing a follow-up book, or you haven't even thought that far down the road?
I haven't even thought about it. I mean, sometimes I have some ideas, but boy, for every, 100 ideas I have, there's maybe half a good one.
No, I mean, listen, I doubt that, but I feel like this book was so timely because of also COVID, right? Everybody is like stuck in their lockdown and not doing what they want to be doing. And they're looking for any hit to be, and it's probably such it was so increased by, of course, social media and digital and porn and food, like any big addiction would be, is going to be like, it's going to be at its like precipice at that point, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And it's just going to be like the modern dilemma. I mean, this is really just opening the conversation of, what we need to continue to talk about for like the foreseeable future. And it's so disorienting because on the one hand, we've got people dying in the Ukraine.
I know.
And we're obsessing about our Instagram, but it is the world we live in. I mean, we can't, we have to accept that is the world that we live in. So like, how are we going to make the best of it?
Absolutely true. Well, I really appreciate your time. You're fantastic. No, seriously, thank you. The book is called Dopamine Nation. Here it is. And hopefully, I mean, maybe you can come on again and shed some light again on topics in it, because I know this is going to resonate with a lot of people, as it has already. And you're obviously extremely knowledgeable. And like I said, I really appreciate you coming on. You're not on social media, so how do people find you? Just not, they don't.
They don't, essentially. They listen to your podcast and read the book.
Right, exactly. And then leave you alone, right? Leave you to teach and do, exactly. That's exactly true. That's good though. Good on you for not getting sucked into that vortex of social media, girl.
Oh, I wouldn't be able to handle it. Guaranteed I wouldn't be able to handle it.
That was very, very smart of you. Because like I said from the beginning, once you start, it's like literally a black hole and you cannot get out.
Right.
So, but thank you. I appreciate your time. And
My pleasure.
I'll see you soon.
Sounds good. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Habits and hustle, time to get it rolling. Stay up on the grind, don't stop, keep it going. Habits and hustle, from nothing into something. All out, hosted by Jennifer Cohen. Visionaries, tune in, you can get to know them. Be inspired, this is your moment. Excuses, we ain't having that. The Habits and Hustle podcast, powered by Habit Nest.